And welcome to another episode of Nights at the Roundtable. Tis your boy Man Wheezy, hailing here in Nashville. We got Be Real out in LA.
What's up, y'all?
Chilling. And then we got Pastor Zach Lambert from Austin, Texas, Restore Church. What's up, bruh?
So great to be with y'all, man. I'm so excited about this conversation.
Me too, man. I was doing a little deep dive on your page, and I was, it's funny to find people that instantly or automatically kind of you feel like, me and this homie would chill. Like we would chill for real, because just the way you presented things, the way you're very, I would say, and I'd be curious to think, would you consider yourself progressive? And if so, do you hate the word progressive?
Probably yes and yes.
Yeah.
I think you phrased that so perfectly. Yeah. I think most people would call me and some of our church progressive, but I think in the grand scheme of Christianity, both now and over the last couple of thousand years, that we're actually pretty like traditional as far as, centered around the person and work of Christ and all of that stuff. But I think what has become progressive around social issues and exploring some theology more deeply and stuff like that, I think people would definitely call us progressive.
That's so interesting because I freaking agree. It's almost as if going back to the original ways of doing things feels progressive, because we've wandered so far away from what it looks like to be a biblical Christian that it's insane. We always say it on this podcast, but it feels like we've transitioned more to nationalism than Christianity.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. Yeah. I mean, you don't have to look too far in this, the 81% of people who voted for Trump and who would call themselves Christians and, those kinds of things. So I think a lot of that's come to define what specifically kind of white American Christianity is. And yeah, it's overwhelming to watch something like the insurrection happen and you see people carrying crosses and flags with Jesus' name and all this stuff on it, right? And you realize that for a sizable amount of people, that represents Christianity to them. And I think it's too easy for us to just be like, well, they're not real Christians, because for them, their faith and their version of Christianity led them to do those things. And so I think we can't just discard them as like fake Christians. We have to confront what is the ideology that's driving some of these things that they see their Christianity and Christian nationalism as compatible.
Sure. I mean, do you feel like you found an answer or at least have an hypothesis?
Oh man, no. I don't. I don't think there is like an easy answer. I think that history helps us understand that this is not anything new, that people have been using the name of Jesus and weaponizing Christianity really since the 3rd and 4th century, with Constantine and Rome making it kind of a national religion and requiring people, and all the way into the Crusades and, all kinds of stuff. You have even, Nazi Germany supported by the Christians of that country, right? And so I think you've seen Christianity weaponized specifically in majority Christian countries to do really, really horrible things. And I think that we're just seeing the latest iteration of that. So sometimes that helps me right size it because it feels so hard and heavy, and it is, and I don't want to undersell it, but when I'm able to take a step back and look at the broadness of this is history repeating itself in a lot of ways. So not only can we learn from the past as far as the problems, I think hopefully we can learn from the past as far as solutions to some of these things too.
Yeah. I agree. It's one of those things where I'm currently not attending an actual church on Sunday just because of job and all the kind of like commitments and stuff. Yeah. But one of the questions that I constantly ask myself, and then I ask pastor friends, is what do you envision the church in 20 years? And it's interesting because, obviously we could have a sort of vision of what we think this looks like. And, some of this gets back to just simply following the ways of Jesus. Like some of this looks like getting back to what he spoke about in the Beatitudes and actually taking that like at face value. For you and your church, one of those things of where do you see this thing going? Obviously, we feel like we've lost our way. Like one of my favorite lines ever in a rap song is J. Cole and Love Yours. Yeah. And he says, good news, nigga, is you came a long way. Bad news, nigga, you went the wrong way.
Yeah.
And I think about that, and it's like for so many people in modern times, we feel like in our modernity, right, we've come such a long way, but in a lot of ways, we've come the wrong way.
Yeah.
So for you as a pastor, leader of a house, where do you envision this thing going?
Well, I think there's two answers to that question. One is where I hope it goes, and then one is
Uh-huh.
maybe more realistic where I think it's going to go.
Uh-huh.
And I'll start with the where I think it's going to go. I think there will be a continued kind of splintering of what it means to be a Christian in the United States. And I think for a lot of people, what it means to be a Christian is this kind of label that they choose to place upon themselves that really becomes synonymous with a lot of very fundamentalist politics and exclusionary things and gun rights, and I mean just all kinds of stuff, right? So that's what it means then when some people use the word Christian, that's what they mean. And I think you'll see, and we are seeing, whole churches formed around things like that, that maybe they're brand new or maybe they already existed and they kind of leaned a little bit that way, but now they have just gone full into, we're not just Christians, we're kind of Christian nationalists, which is this very specific understanding of Christianity being applied to all Americans. And it centers whiteness, it centers conservatism, it centers a number of other, excuse me, things, anti-LGBTQ rhetoric, things like that, right? So it has all of these markers that really don't have anything to do with Jesus or the way of Jesus and things like that. So I think we'll see that continue to rise and become a thing. And then my hope is that we'll see a continued rise in churches that are returning to being completely centered around the person and work of Jesus. And here's my thing on that. When somebody asks you, are you a Christian? What they are asking the vast majority of the time is, do you intellectually assent to a set of doctrinal statements?
Right.
And that set of doctrinal statements is different based on who's asking the question. But that's what they're asking. Sometimes it's just a couple of things. Hey, do you believe Jesus came and died and came back to life? Sometimes it's a whole mess of things, including a bunch of social issues and all of this kind of stuff, right? But that's what they're asking. Do you believe a set of doctrines? But in reality, that's not what Christian has historically meant. Christian means little Christ. And it was actually used pejoratively for the first time because people had so modeled their lives after Jesus the Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, that they were like, you're just little Christ, you're not even your own people. You're just following his way. And they were originally called people of the way of Jesus.
Right.
And so I would like, and I think we're trying to do this very imperfectly at our church, but to be people who, when it comes to being a Christian, it really is that little Christ that is following the way and teachings of Jesus. And I've started saying, like, when people ask, are you a Christian? I say, ask my neighbor, because they're the ones that should be able to tell if I'm actually a Christian or not. Because if that's the singular identifying characteristic of a Christian is loving God and loving neighbor, and we really love God through loving our neighbor, then if you want to know if I'm a Christian, you should be asking my neighbor if I love them well. And I'm hoping that we see more and more of that become a predominant understanding of Christianity in the United States.
What's so wild about that is that sounds so revolutionary. And what's crazy is that's the building block, right?
Yeah,
like that's the foundation. Like that's step one.
Yeah.
And
100%.
hearing you say that, you're just like, absolutely, right? Like that's it. That's what we're going for.
Do you ever feel because I used to get this, I don't know how much you know about me, but I used to be in the Christian industry, like music wise, right? So I used to be a rapper or whatever, and I would always find musicians as they come into the field, they would be like, I'm here to, because they're younger, I'm here to, to change the way things are done. This isn't your normal mom and pop, music. I'm gonna push the boundaries, all this like revolutionary talk. And I'm like, word, okay, cool. Then they get in the system of Christianity, in the business of Christianity, and realize, oh, if you ain't making music for AC radio, which is not revolutionary, you're not eating.
Yeah.
So slowly but surely they become assimilated to the system that is considered Christianity. And it would always bother me because I was genuinely someone who's like, nah, bruh, I'm going to change the game, and I don't follow I don't need y'all. I don't need your money. I'm good. And so I kept trying to push boundaries. Do you find the pressure because I don't know if you're affiliated with the denomination or not, but are you able to move like how you want to move, or have you set into this and it's like, yo, I'm gonna freaking change this game? But do you find the hard pressure of being like, assimilate, go mainstream, you know?
100%. 100%. I mean, that's such a good question. It's such a well kind of phrased way of understanding what usually happens when you enter into these spaces. So a little bit of my story is that I was working at kind of mega churches in Dallas during and after seminary. And then we got ready to move back here to Austin, which is my hometown, to start our church. It's called Restore, that you mentioned earlier. So this was 2014, 2015. We were kind of starting the process of getting everything together and moving down here to launch the church. Our church launched in February of 2016. So we're a little bit over 7 years old. And me and the guy I planted with, Matt Gonzalez, we were 26 at the time, both of us, and very much that attitude, man. Like, we're going to change the world. We're revolutionary. We're going to do. Now, I do think we had a good right sizing of, like Brandon said, the new is really something very old, right? The revolution that already happened, we're just kind of stepping into it. Jesus is the biggest revolutionary. We're just trying to follow in his footsteps. But it still was like, for kind of church, and especially in Texas, we're trying to do something pretty radical and different. And so we ended up doing what is kind of jokingly called the NASCAR approach in church planting, which is like, here's the car. You want to slap a sticker on it, say you sponsored it. That's great. But we're going to go this way. We're driving, right? But we can put as many stickers on the car as possible so we can raise money, so we can get off the ground, so we can do this thing. And so we ended up with a denomination, and then a number of 5 or 6 networks of church planting networks, and then probably 10 to 15 individual churches who were like, yeah, we'll jump in and sponsor you. So we had a lot of stickers on the car. We hit the ground. We start rolling. February 2016, we launch. June 2016, so just a few months later, we do our first like baptism service thing. Baptize a number of new folks who are kind of coming back to faith or coming to faith. And one of them happens to be this lesbian woman. And then the next Sunday, we do our first kid dedication. She and her wife dedicate their 3 kids. Honestly, I didn't think anything about it because this is just like who we were going to be. It's who we said we were going to be. We were rolling. And then all of a sudden, my phone starts blowing up. And I start getting calls from the denomination, from the networks, from the pastors of the churches that sponsored us. And they said, "Wait, we've been seeing some stuff you've been posting, seeing some stuff you've been doing. We've even let a little bit of it go, but we can't let it go anymore. And basically, you need to assimilate. Like, this is becoming a problem." And we had some hard decisions to make early on because we're like 4 or 5 months old as a church. We have raised, try to get 3 years of external support to help us get off the ground. That's kind of the goal in church planting, is you want to be financially autonomous by 3 years. And so we were just like, man, are we going to be able to do this if we really lean into who we think God's called us to be and not assimilate? Are we going to die not doing that? Or do we have a choice to assimilate, still feed our families, still get this church off the ground? But we kind of give up on what we feel like God's called us to do. And so that was an inflection point for sure in the history of our church. And thankfully, I'm proud to say that we leaned into who we thought we were going to be and who we wanted to be and who we felt God calling us to be. And so that was going to be fully inclusive of all people, including LGBTQ people. It was going to be people who had really hard conversations about racial justice work and people who pursued justice work. We were going to be people who had, women and queer folks leading at every area. We were going to be people who did this, right? And then slowly but surely, the denomination immediately put us under a investigation that lasted 18 months. I had to give testimony. I had to do the whole, bro. That's a whole other podcast probably, but
wow.
But the craziest part was that we hadn't actually broken any rules because our local, it's a national denomination called the Evangelical Free Church of America, mostly out of the Midwest. They've got 300-400 churches in Texas, Oklahoma, which was our district. And the Texas Oklahoma district didn't have any anti-LGBTQ policies. And so we hadn't broken any rules. So they were just trying to kind of get us out. And I just basically were like, no, you're going to have to kick us out because I don't think we did anything wrong. And I don't want other people to have to go through this, And so took them 1.5 years, but they ended up rewriting their policy statement, including an anti-LGBTQ statement, and then requiring us to sign it when we didn't. They ended up formally kicking us out of the denomination. I was defrocked, which is like I had my ministry license revoked, I still have the email from the head of theology for the denomination that said I was going to hell and leading all our people to hell. And it was an intense time, y'all. Yeah. I mean, it was an intense time. that happened kind of slowly but surely with all the church networks and a lot of the churches that we were a part of, because we were coming out of evangelicalism, for the most part. And so anyway, all that to say, there was so much pressure. But our saving grace was honestly our people. Like our people that went to the church were just all in. They wore us getting kicked out of that denomination like a badge of honor, and they were like, what do we need to do? Increase our giving? All right, great. Let's do it. I mean, they were just like, whatever it takes to get this thing off the ground, because we want to see this thing happen. Because for so many of them, we started with a group of like 25 people. I think 20 of the 25 didn't come directly from another church. They'd been out of church 1 year, 5 years, 20 years, or since they were kids. And so they were like, this is the first time I felt at home in church, maybe in my entire life. And I'm not going to let this go away. And as we continued to kind of build that group, more and more people felt that way. And so we were able to kind of move into autonomy, get out of the pressure to assimilate. But I know so many that aren't. And I'll be honest too, I know a lot of that is related to the fact that I'm a straight, cis, white guy that lived in those evangelical spaces and got a lot of benefits of the doubt. And we probably lasted longer on some of that support than somebody who would not have had those intrinsic characteristics. So in some ways, I know that is a reality for us that may not have been available to some other folks. And that sucks. And so what I'm trying to do a lot outside of Restore with my time right now is to create more and more spaces with a bunch of other folks so that people can start churches that are all the things that I just described and get off the ground and not feel like assimilate or die. They really get to feel like they get to run their own race.
Yeah. Do you remember the turning point? Because as you said earlier, this LGBTQ thing is, the church is going to die on that hill. It's going to die on that hill until they die, until they actually die, until the old ones die. And all you got is Gen Zers that are now pastors. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know when they're going to come off of that, but I know for me, I used to be staunch like that. And I've talked about it multiple times. I call myself out on this podcast numerous times. And I remember my transition, and it was when I married my wife and half of our family was gay. And that's not even like hyperbole, it's literally half of them. And I was forced into relationship because we know that church usually teaches, be in the world, not of it, So if you're going to have a relationship with people who don't love Jesus, it's only to save them. It's not to care about them. It's not to meet them where they're at. It's not to befriend them. If you are there, it is to save them and bring them to church, not bring them to Jesus.
Right.
Bring them to church.
Yeah. We'll do the rest. We'll take it from there.
Yeah, we need
get him to the house.
Get him to the house of the Lord, and we'll do the rest. And so I was quickly confronted with love for my family. Yeah. And I was like, oh no. I'm feeling all the feels. Like like my brother-in-law's, boyfriend, I literally remember telling him, hey man, don't mess this up, because I really like him. We go to movies together. We watch sports together. You know what I'm saying? Like, we do all these things together. I'm like, don't mess this up, because I like him and I want him to stay around. And I'm like completely opposite of who I was. But I remember the moment it all changed. So for you being so engulfed in that mainstream church ideology, like, was it there that you were like, ugh, this don't feel right? Or did you have to get out of it to be like, what are we doing?
That's a really good question. I think I describe it like a dam, and there started to be little cracks that formed. And then at some point, the whole thing gave way. And so one of the first cracks was being in seminary and trying to more deeply understand kind of non-affirming theology. And I went to a very conservative seminary. And so taking classes on some of those things and really just, I'm always been a kind of a questioner, I'm not just going to take things at face value. And so asking a lot of questions in classes like that and feeling like the answers were not really adequate. Right. So that was kind of one of the first cracks. But one of the biggest cracks was then I started meeting LGBTQ plus people, LGBTQ plus Christians, especially, who did not conform to any of the stereotypes that I'd been told that they would conform to. Right. That they were actually like much more sexually chaste than I was. They like read their Bible more than me. Right. Like, they were so much more serious about discipling their kids than I was. I mean, it was just like, I kept feeling like okay, these folks are actually teaching me more about Jesus than probably I could ever teach them about Jesus. And yet I've been told that somehow they're the abomination, they're hell-bound, they're the ones that should be excluded from church, X, Y, and Z. And so those cracks started to get bigger and bigger. And then here's, I think, the best explanation of what kind of deconstruction is, or disentangling, or whatever you want to call it. It's when something you believe comes into conflict with something you experience, right? Mm-hmm. And so I've been told to believe that LGBTQ people were this kind of way, but my experience was that they were not, right? And so what happens then is that you have to go back to that belief and you have to make a decision. Am I just going to ignore my experiences and go with what I believe? Or am I going to let my experience actually allow me to dive back into scripture and theology and whatever, and try to figure out, maybe I've missed this, maybe there's a new way of understanding it. So when I began to dive back in to the Bible around these, primarily those 6 passages and some other stuff, I began to read much more widely and became convinced pretty quickly around affirming theology. And so that was kind of like, it wasn't even necessarily like a light switch kind of a moment for me. It was a bunch of small moments that eventually the dam just kind of burst. And I realized, I think I've actually probably thought this for a while. And it's time that I am much more publicly articulate about it. And so that was also part of the journey too, was being much more open and direct, whether it was, on socials or from the pulpit or whatever.
Did that part where you kind of like the dam broke for you, was that on the tail end of you working at a megachurch?
It was kind of like right when we were starting our church. Yeah. So kind of the tail end of that, starting our church.
So you knew going into your church, you're like, bruh, this is going to be us. Ride or die, it's us.
I would have to be very candid and vulnerable and honest. I mean, I would say we wanted to be very inclusive and all of those things, right? But I don't know, in 2014 when we were starting that process, and I'm 25 years old, I'm not sure I knew what that meant. I'm not sure I knew the implications of what that would be. Right. Yeah. Like if you'd come to me at that point and been like, hey, could a trans woman be in, a member at your church or be in leadership or something like that, I think I would have said, I'm not sure what like a trans woman is, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like I was just like so in that, coming out of that world, that I had a lot of educating to have happen to me. I needed a lot of education at that point, right? And so it took a while, I think, for me to be able to fully articulate, like, this is what, this is why, this is how. But I would say that the cool part of that was when we were much more public, both as a whole church and then me personally, no internal people at Restore were like, oh, I can't believe this. I mean, this is who we've always been. Thank you for better articulating it. So it was more like, I think, a discovery of who we were and who we always wanted to be, rather than, I don't envy people who have to make a big shift, because they started one way or they took over a church that was one way and they have to change it. That was not our story at all. So I'm thankful for that.
Yeah. I mean, these topics are so big, and I've not realized why they're so problematic with people. And I ask myself, I'm like, why be so angry with people like us who are so open to receive more people? Is our amount of love or the expansiveness that we would like to love? Like, are you mad at us wanting to welcome more people? Like, I'm trying to figure out, because I feel like the biggest dichotomy for them is that, at least what I always hear is, you guys are really just affirming sin, and you just want people to just live how they want to live. Yeah. And I'm like, just think about that for a second. You're telling me I just want to affirm people's sin. How does that benefit me?
Right.
Like, what does that do for my life? I'm not making money off of these people. I'm not, like, I don't know. I don't get anything from saying, bruh, I believe you, that you love Jesus and Jesus loves you. Yeah. What transaction happened right there?
Right.
Besides me saying, I love you, and your relationship between God is between you and God. Yeah. I didn't gain anything from it. It's not like, I am benefiting in any way, but I'm confused at the fact that are you so mad that we want more people to make heaven in spite of what you think they shouldn't make heaven for? And is that a devilish desire or is that a godly desire? Like, sometimes I really try to figure this out and I can't put a finger on it. Because I felt this way about my wife, because my wife was always pro. She was always pro because obviously she grew up with, a gay family. And so she couldn't reconcile it. That one part of the religion, she's like, I can't get down with this because this means that my family, no matter what, they're not coming. Right. And so she always had a problem with it. And I remember one time she was like, I don't want to read the Bible no more because I can't reconcile this. And at this point, I was still hella staunch Christian. Yeah. So I went into freak mode. Oh my God, I'm traveling the world, touring, telling people about Jesus, and my wife don't want to read the Bible. Oh my gosh, like, what are people going to think? What are they going to say? And all she was telling me was, I love these people so much that to think that a God can't love them as well when he created them, but yet I can love them and I had nothing to do with making them who they are. Yeah. How do you even, and this mainly this is the, the pillar, this LGBTQ plus pillar, but it also goes against everyone else that we demonize, what is the issue? Is it that are you mad that the idea of everyone making it is horrible? Because then what you're essentially admitting is you need this to be classist. You need this to be, this needs to be executive VIP shit. This can't be we all make it because Jesus created us all. Right. Nah, that don't fly.
No, I totally agree, man. I think I say a lot, like, I just can't imagine a scenario where I get to heaven and Jesus is like, you loved way too many people, Zach. Like, you let too many people come to church. Like, I just can't imagine like that scenario, looking at the life and teachings of Jesus in scripture, that he would get up and be like, I can't believe you let queer people come to church. Like, how, can you imagine a scenario where Jesus was like that? Like, I just can't. But for me, I think, to your actual question, Manuel, like, I used to think it was all about people really hated other people, and they just needed that, like, delineation of I'm better and they're worse. And I still think that's a lot true, right? I think we've seen that happen over the history of our country and human history too, where we like to arrange ourselves by hierarchy because it makes people at the top feel superior and it makes people down lower feel inferior, right? I think that's a huge part of it. But I also think, man, I've become more and more convinced over the last couple of years that it's not just because people hate other people, it's because a lot of people really hate themselves. Yeah. And I think people are so guilt-ridden and shame-ridden, and they can't imagine a God who just unconditionally loves them, who fully knows them and fully loves them. And so they are running this act, right? And if they allow their mind to go to that place for other people, then it would mean that their mind would have to go to that place for them. And they just can't let go of that, right? There's just like too much internal pain and self-hatred and all this stuff. And so, like, Twitter's my main kind of medium. And so I get a lot of angry people on Twitter every time I talk about LGBTQ stuff plus or whatever. And I think that I used to get so mad, so defensive and all that. And then it was a friend, actually a queer friend, who we were on Zoom one time, and I was asking him, like, why do you think people get so mad? And he was the first one, shout out to Leek. He was the first one that was like, man, I think it's just people just really, like, cannot love themselves. And so they cannot extend love to other people. And I began to look for that and more responses and stuff. And I just began to see it everywhere. And so, I'm very influenced by liberation theology and, James Cone and Oscar Romero and people like that throughout the ages, who talk a lot about this liberation-based God who wants liberation for certainly the marginalized and the oppressed, but for all people. And so I want to see people, like, I want to see LGBTQ plus people set free from the oppression that they experience. I also want to see oppressors set free, right? Because that's killing them too. you know, like God did not design us to dominate other people. And so I think that trying to pray and develop that heart for the angry, the mean-spirited, the exclusive folks too, maybe, you know, the older brother in the prodigal son story, right? Like develop my heart for those folks so that they can experience the grace, hope, love, and liberation of Jesus too. That's helped me quite a bit on this whole journey.
Thanks so much, y'all, for listening to part 1 of this episode. We appreciate it greatly. Hey, like and subscribe if you guys are feeling this. Share it with your friends. We appreciate it so much. Please come back next week for part 2. Love you.